He first struck in 1970, and his crimes shook the Romanian capital. For more than a year, he roamed the squalid streets of Bucharest at night in search of his victims. He chose single, attractive women. He attacked with hammer, axe, hatchet, metal rod, or knife, always during bad weather. He mutilated his victims and brutally raped them. And by the family media, he was named the most sadistic serial killer in the history of Romania. When the agents tracking him were horrified to discover that the psychopath was sucking the blood from victims who were still alive, they gave him the awe-inspiring nickname, the Vampire of Bucharest. Dark File. Deadly good stories. In the penultimate year of World War II, Bucharest was not a safe place. Assaults, robberies, and rapes were the order of the day. Fear, despair, and hunger among the residents of the Romanian capital meant that murders were also common. When Elena Udrea was murdered in her own bed, Commissar Constantin Turaj, who arrived on the scene, immediately realized that he had never before had to deal with such a sadistic murderer. The woman died from several blows to the head inflicted with a blunt instrument. After death, she was brutally raped. Numerous bite marks were discovered on the body, and a piece of skin was missing from the genital area. To Turaj's horror, this was only the beginning of a gruesome series of murders of young women.
Between June and November 1944, 4 other women were murdered in similar circumstances. The murderer killed only blondes, always during bad weather, mainly during heavy rain. Maria, Elena, Rosalia, and Maria died from blows inflicted on their heads. At the time of or shortly after death, the victims were raped and mutilated. The murderer's fingerprint, the same one secured at the 3 crime scenes, did not help identify the perpetrator. The psychopath remained elusive, and the case was forgotten. With the war coming to an end, solving the criminal mystery was not a priority for anyone.
Several decades later, Wednesday evening in Bucharest on April 8, 1970, it was very cold and rainy. Walking home alone down an empty street was Elena Oprea, a young blonde who had just finished her afternoon shift at a nearby factory. Less than 100 meters separated her from the apartment block where she lived. However, the distance proved too great. Elena never made it safely inside. The next morning, shortly after sunrise, a passerby discovered her lifeless body. The arriving militiamen secured the crime scene, and Inspector Trajan Tandon conducted a preliminary examination, later detailing his findings in his 2002 book.
Elena Oprea was attacked with an axe, then bitten and brutally murdered with several blows to the head. The examination revealed that the perpetrator was a man with a very disturbed mind. The killer bit the victim and sucked her blood. The rape did not occur, probably because someone frightened him away.
The mutilated body lay in the bushes, just outside the entrance to the building. Although the area was illuminated, no one saw or heard anything. The militiamen were not surprised. In communist Romania at the time, witnesses to crimes rarely chose to share their knowledge with the notorious authorities. If Inspector Tandon suspected that the psychopath would strike again, he was not wrong. Less than 2 months later, another assault occurred on a rainy night between the 1st and 2nd of June. The psychopath attacked near the city's cemetery. Florica Marcu was knocked to the ground and beaten. The perpetrator dragged her to a secluded area, where he stabbed her in the abdomen and raped her. As he attempted to suck blood from her wound, however, the assailant was frightened away by a truck driver who, on his way to relieve himself, heard a woman's screams coming from deep inside the cemetery. Florica survived but was unable to describe her attacker. The first sketch of the sadistic criminal was drawn by the militiamen on July 24th, shortly after the 3rd attack on a lone woman. Margareta Hunganu was luckier than the previous victims. The perpetrator was scared away by a group of men armed with an axe and only managed to snatch her purse. The woman described the assailant, and Inspector Trajan Tandon created a portrait of him, detailing the most important features of the killer's appearance in his book.
We were now looking for a male of medium height, approximately 172 to 175 cm. He had a round head, a gaunt face, long curly hair falling onto the nape of his neck, a prominent chin, a nose with wide nostrils and large ears. His hair was black, His eyes were probably dark, and he had increased body hair.
The description of the murderer was confirmed by Olga, who was attacked on the night of November 22nd. Although she survived, she was brutally beaten and raped. An investigation had been underway for 5 months due to the lack of any evidence. It was stalled. Romanian authorities, however, were convinced that the arrest of the wanted man was only a matter of time. Not wanting to cause panic, they forbade journalists from informing the public about the assailant prowling the streets of Bucharest. People were to continue to live in the belief that all sorts of serial rapists, murderers, and perverts are exclusively part of the broken capitalist West. In the socialist countries of people's democracy, there was no right to have such individuals. The peaceful winter was interrupted by a brutal attack on another woman. This time, the attack occurred on the snowy night of February 15th to 16th, 1971. Both this victim and the next, who was beaten and raped 2 days later, survived. In serious condition, they were taken to the hospital, where they described the perpetrator. Their testimonies were detailed and almost completely aligned with the description of the rapist already in the authorities' possession. He had begun attacking women with greater frequency than before. However, he remained vigilant, elusive, and brutal, and, as it would soon turn out, deadly effective. The mysterious Night Stalker now had 6 attacks to his name, including 1 fatality. And this was not his last. In truth, he was just getting started. Until now, he had often been scared off by random passers-by. So, he decided to carefully select the locations of his hunts to avoid unwanted witnesses. 2 weeks later, the attacker struck again, and this time, no one interrupted him.
Fanica Ilie was found on the morning of March 5, 1971. She had been dead for several hours. The woman's face was mutilated, and her breasts, abdomen, thighs, and crotch had been bitten by her attacker. An autopsy revealed that the rape had occurred post-mortem. It was also discovered that the perpetrator had sucked blood from the wounds. No traces were found at the crime scene that could help identify the murderer. A breakthrough in the investigation would come a few weeks later.
Exactly on the anniversary of the first crime, on the night of April 8th and 9th, 1971, during a heavy downpour, another woman was murdered. Gorgita Popa, like the previous victims, died from several blows to the head inflicted with a blunt instrument, probably a metal rod. After her death, the murderer inflicted 48 stab wounds to her chest. Once again, there was post-mortem rape and bite marks. Examination at the scene revealed that the killer, in addition to sucking blood, bit off part of the woman's crotch. The missing piece of flesh was never found. The total number of attacks rose to 8, including 3 fatal ones. No evidence, no clues, not a single suspect. It was realized that time was running out. The mysterious psychopath still roamed the dark streets of Bucharest in the pouring rain. He felt unpunished and confident. Meanwhile, the militiamen still wandered in the dark. The General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party demanded the immediate arrest of the elusive murderer of women. When good news did not come at the behest of the Romanian dictator, a special branch of the Criminal Investigation Board of the State Security Department was brought into the investigation. Experienced investigators from the Securitate had far greater capabilities than militia officers and far greater resources. The case was given a high priority. The goal was one: to capture the perpetrator of vicious crimes such as had never been recorded in Romania in almost 3 decades. A retired commissioner who took part in a similar investigation in 1944, in his book Fingerprint Riddles, he wrote,
Romanian authorities were finally forced to admit that a serial killer and psychopath had been prowling Bucharest for a year. Information filtered through the Securitate was allowed to leak into the national press. A wave of fear swept over the residents of the Romanian capital.
More than 1,000 additional armed militiamen were delegated to patrol the streets of Bucharest at night. 100 unmarked police cars were constantly circling the capital. This was the largest law enforcement mobilization to date in the history of Romania. Within days, all the men previously convicted for murder or rape were arrested. A total of more than 2,000 people, however, without result.
The investigation was given the codename Operation Eagle. The perpetrator's modus operandi was also analyzed. Due to his apparent penchant for sucking the blood of his victims, He was given the nickname the Vampire of Bucharest. It was noted that the murderer targeted young women only at night. The attacks were always accompanied by bad weather conditions, heavy rain, snowfall, or dense fog. He followed his victims and, at a moment of opportunity, attacked them by striking their heads multiple times with a blunt instrument, either a hammer, axe, hatchet, or iron rod. During or shortly after the murder, there was always rape. When the murderer had time, he indulged in acts of cannibalism, biting off and possibly consuming parts of his victims' bodies. It was also observed that all of the murdered victims were blondes, while the women who managed to survive were brunettes. Was this merely a coincidence, or part of a calculated plan born in the mind of a monster? The question remained open.
It was suspected that the murderer would strike again soon. Women were warned not to go out alone after dark. Men escorted their wives and daughters to work and then home. After a rumor appeared in the media that the murderer was attacking only blondes, hundreds of women decided to dye their hair. Despite increased security measures, in the first days of May, the Vampire of Bucharest struck again, multiple times.
First, on the night between the 1st and 2nd of May, during heavy rain as usual, Stana Saracen was attacked. She survived, although she was brutally raped. 3 days later, Michaela Ursu, a blonde, was killed. During the attempted post-mortem rape, the murderer was startled by passers-by and fled. Undeterred, 2 hours later, he attacked Marie Iordasha. Fortunately, it ended in a mere struggle, during which an iron rod fell from the attacker's hand. The loud clang of metal hitting the concrete sidewalk caused him to panic and flee.
During the inspections of the corpse, the agents made a breakthrough discovery. Under the body of the murdered woman, Inspector Trajan Tandon found an important piece of evidence, a soaked document being a medical release.
Although the ink was smeared, making it impossible to read the patient's name, other details were legible. The document had been issued to a student of the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in Bucharest.
2 days later, there were 3 more attempts. The women survived. Meanwhile, investigators tried to identify the vampire on the basis of the found medical release. Although the student's name could not be read, the doctor's stamp was identified without difficulty. The document was issued by Dr. Octavian. Investigators confiscated the doctor's entire medical records in order to pick out the names of all the suspected students. The detailed examination of the doctor's archive took 2 weeks and yielded the desired results. It turned out that the doctor had issued similar exemptions to a total of 83 students. By May 26, 1971, 15 students had failed to submit the required document to the university secretariat. It became clear to the agents that one of these students must have been the Vampire of Bucharest.
In the early mornings of May 27, 1971, Inspector Trajan Tandon, along with a group of armed militiamen, arrived at the dormitory. They immediately arrested all 14 men whose medical releases had not reached the university authorities. However, it turned out that they all had the document with them. The last man on the list of suspects was 25-year-old Ion Rimaru, who was absent from the dormitory at the time. Inspector Tandon felt he was just one step away from capturing the wanted psychopath.
The arrest of the Bucharest vampire took place in front of the dormitory entrance. The man was carrying a sports bag at the time of the arrest. As the militiamen surrounded the student, he attempted to attack the officers with a kitchen knife taken from the bag. In addition to the knife, he was carrying a small axe, but he was quickly overpowered and handcuffed. As he was taken to the police station, Rimaru shouted,
"I beg for forgiveness for everything I have done, please. Forgive me."
Recalling the moment of arrest in his book, the inspector wrote,
There was a sense of relief in the capital. The long-awaited moment had arrived. The killer had been caught.
When the militiamen searched the academic room where Rimaru lived, in a backpack under the bed, they found the murder weapons, with traces of dried blood, an axe, and a metal rod. There was no longer any doubt. The vampire from Bucharest would no longer harm any woman. Investigators still had to answer 2 key questions. Who was Ion? And what made the poor veterinary student become a ruthless psychopath? He was born on October 12, 1946, in the town of Corobia, near the Romanian-Bulgarian border. The boy's childhood was not a happy one. Floria's father, a night bus driver, often beat his 3 sons. The eldest of them, Ion, suffered the most. His mother, Ekaterina, did not stand up for the children. She herself was also a victim. When Floria got tired of abusing his wife and children, he left the family home and went to Bucharest, where he came from.
Floria was a very tough and violent man. When I was with him, God did not grant me a single day without a beating. The children witnessed all the violent scenes.
After the separation, Mr. and Mrs. Rimaru still kept in touch with each other. And Ion, after starting high school, he joined his father. Although he lived in a boarding school, he often met with his father. Soon after arriving in the capital, Ion began to have problems with the law. Every time he was arrested for theft or vagrancy, Floria extended a helping hand to his son. He paid the bail and picked up his son from jail. Ekaterina blamed her ex-husband for Ion's transgressions.
Ion's life took a wrong turn ever since he came under his father's care. When I saw him, I felt that something was wrong. I asked, but he wouldn't tell me anything. Floria did not take good care of Ion. Why did my two younger sons, who remained in my care, not go down the wrong path?
Ion Rimaru wanted to study. In 1966, he became a student at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Bucharest. However, he was a poor student, as his lecturers often emphasized. He repeated each successive year of study, and one professor testified,
As a student, he was very weak. As a man, even weaker. He was a shy and frightened semi-illiterate with a poor vocabulary. He gave the impression that nothing interested him.
Rimaru's colleagues did not have a better opinion of him. They often complained to the dormitory manager about his strange behavior. Ion could walk around the room all night. He committed self-mutilation. It also happened that he settled his physiological needs at his own bed. Every now and then he would disappear for the night. No one knew where or why. When he returned in the morning, the traces of blood on his clothes explained to his colleagues his participation in nighttime fights. Attention was also drawn to the man's strange behavior toward female colleagues. Ion followed girls whom he liked and was able to sit all night at the door of the room in which they slept. He reacted to any critical remarks by his classmates or educators with aggression, which quickly turned into a state of despondency and resignation. After his arrest, all the residents of the dormitory felt an indescribable sense of relief. During interrogation, Ion Rimaru once confessed to all the crimes. Once he retracted his explanation. Each day, he presented a different version of events. At one point, he accused his father of complicity in the attacks on the women. After these words, Floria, who had been actively supporting his son, suddenly disappeared. The agents failed to find him. And although Ion later recanted his accusations, the investigation revealed that Floria not only knew about his son's crimes, but also accepted from him items stolen from the victims. However, participation in the crimes could not be proven. During the trial, all female survivors pointed to Ion as the perpetrator of the attacks. Evidence in the case was also a dental imprint, which perfectly matched the bite marks on the body of the victims. The testimony of the vampire's mother also carried a lot of weight.
One day, during a visit to Ion's dormitory, I saw an axe and a knife in his room. I was frightened. Later, I told Floria about it, and he promised that he would take care of it and remove those things from Ion's possession. At the same time, Floria admitted that he was aware of Ion's nightly wanderings in Bucharest. My husband even suspected that Ion might be responsible for the crimes rumored in the city. I didn't believe it, nor did I report it to the militiamen, because it couldn't be my son.
If Ekaterina Rimaru had believed the vampire's victims would have been fewer. The evidence proving the guilt of the accused proved irrefutable. So Rimaru began to pretend psychological illness. However, when in the courtroom, psychiatric experts ruled that he was a sane person and could answer for his crimes, the murderer fell silent. Until the end of the trial, he did not say a word. Looking pace to the wall, he did not even answer the questions of his defense counsel.
The judges had no doubt. Ion Rimaru was found guilty on all charges. 14 counts of assaulting women, 4 counts of premeditated murder, 6 counts of attempted murder, 7 counts of rape committed with special cruelty, 1 count of attempted rape, as well as posthumous desecration of bodies and confirmed acts of cannibalism. There could be only one verdict. The Bucharest vampire was sentenced to death.
A wooden pillar, hammered into the ground in the courtyard of the maximum security prison, bore bullet marks. a gruesome reminder of the many executions carried out there. At dawn on Saturday, October 23, 1971, Ion was led to the post. An armed three-man execution platoon was already waiting at the designated site, ready to deliver justice to the condemned murderer.
In the morning, while the other prisoners were still asleep, Rimaru was taken out of his cell. He was given civilian clothes and knew that in a moment he would be executed. He did not want to go out into the courtyard. Instead, he lay on the floor, trembling with fear. Let's be honest, he acted like a coward. He refused to accept his fate, crying and begging for forgiveness.
Ion Rimaru was forcibly led to the place of execution by prison guards. He jerked and yelled that he was innocent. Tied to a post, he asked for a blindfold, asked if he wanted to give something to the family or smoke his last cigarette. He refused. When the enforcers loaded the weapons, the convict made one last attempt to change his fate.
I beg you, call my father. Let him come here and see what is about to happen to me. He is the one to blame, not me. Only him. I want to live.
These were the last words of the criminal. Just before the shots were fired, he tried to instinctively avoid the bullets. He managed to loosen the rope and circle around the pole, positioning himself with his back to the executioners. The bullets hit him in the neck, shattered his brain, and exited his forehead.
The vampire's body was placed in a wooden box and buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery. Just when it seemed that Rimaru's story was over, life added another chapter to the tale, or rather two.
When a few months after the execution, Commissar Constantin Taraj read his case file, the descriptions of the murders seemed very familiar to him. They reminded him of the crimes of 1944, which Taraj unsuccessfully tried to explain. Was it possible that Rimaru was imitating a serial killer from 3 decades ago? How did he know about him if the details of those crimes never leaked to the press? He tried to link the two series of murders to each other. The solution came completely by chance and was a huge surprise to all. Nearly a year after Ion's execution on September 23, 1972, Floria Rimaru died in an accident. The man was being followed by agents in connection with his alleged complicity in the crimes of his son. The arrest allegedly took place on the train he was traveling on. At the sight of the approaching agents, Floria jumped from the speeding train. As a result of the head injury sustained in the fall, he died. The fingerprints taken from the deceased were entered into the national database. Investigators could not believe what they were seeing. Ion's father turned out to be a World War II serial killer who had been wanted for 28 years. Investigators were certain that his son had no idea about Floria's crimes. Otherwise, he would have used this fact to save himself from execution. 2 generations of Rimaru, 2 serial killers, and the same genes of evil, which awakened in both father and son the same criminal instinct. Did Floria teach Ion to murder? The commissioner in his book was convinced that he did. What they had in common was their modus operandi.
The victims all had the same hair color, only blondes were killed. The murder weapon, the way the corpses were handled, including acts of cannibalism, and even the weather conditions during the murders were strikingly similar. They had almost everything in common. Even the names of their first victims were eerily alike. Floria's first known victim was Elena Udra, while Ion's was Elena Oprah.
Dark File. Deadly good stories.